Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the mini conference, Emergency Remote Teaching and Learning. This is our next to last session, Learning and Leading During Emergency Remote Teaching with George Couros, AJ Juliani, and Katie Novak. So I'm going to turn the time over to George now, who'll start things off.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here, and we're just going to do a little check-in. Should be able to see my screen up there. So just to kind of check in to see how you're doing. I love doing these little intros, and I know that if you put number 5 down, AJ will probably come check in on you, make sure you're okay. I feel like today I've been a 2. Could be a 9 right now. So I'd love to see your responses.
I feel like an 8 right now. I'm turned all upside down. My head hurt. I was just feeling totally 8.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about, as you put in your responses, we're going to, AJ, myself, and Katie's just coming from another meeting, which she's probably in the same place, but going from one link to the other. Right. And so we're going to talk about some things that we've been asked about learning and leading right now and share some of our ideas. And as you're going through the process, because we're going to take turns presenting, please share any questions you have, because we'll actually be looking at some of the ideas, and please share any ideas that you have to some of the problems that we're trying to help with, because I know that's really helpful. So we want this to be a really interactive webinar. And one of the things, and I've shared this link with others, you'll actually see a link right here, tiny.cc/COVID-19 LLA. And I've just kind of compiled some resources, and I know AJ will probably share some links to information as well. But I just wanted to first share this, and please feel free to utilize that. And I'm just making sure that people are connecting in that space. And I already see people sharing, so feel free to utilize that however you want. I kind of update it and change it as we go. And this is probably how a lot of people are feeling right now, right? You know, and I feel a lot of the excitement and eagerness is kind of, we're not necessarily going down, but it's kind of becoming real right now. And so it's easy to kind of plateau in a situation. And I'll tell you, like, just some of the stuff I've been dealing with too, I can't imagine what educators are dealing with. And I just want to show you this video that I shared today. And AJ, just tell me in the first few seconds, just make sure if the audio is working. So this is a video
so
that
as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
That's how a lot of people are feeling about kind of what's going on right now. AJ, did that work? Did the audio work? Good. Yeah. So today, like I shared that this morning because that's how my morning went too. And I thought it was a really funny video, an amazing thing for a teacher to share. AJ, Katie, and myself, we're going to utilize this term emergency remote teaching as we go through this process and as we share these ideas, because we've been talking a lot about this stuff, and like you hear the terminology remote learning and, you know, online learning, virtual learning, whatever. But this is not a normal situation. And this is actually from an article, and I shared it in the links. You can find that talking about emergency remote teaching and how it's different. And just a little story that I wanted to share real quick. I actually spent the last 6 days working with the California Virtual Academies, and it was really incredible to work with them. And what was fascinating to me, we actually had planned to do some work together before all the pandemic stuff, you know, people before quarantine. And then when this all happened, because we were supposed to do it online, they actually said, well, you know what, we got to postpone it because of all these issues that we're dealing with right now. And the first thing I thought was, are you kidding? Like, you're an online school. You're built to deal with this. And really thinking like, that's amazing to me. And when I spent the 5 days with them, really understanding that, yes, they're actually comfortable with online teaching and learning, but the situations of their students and of their staff actually changed dramatically. And so even in an online setting, there's a lot of obstacles that they've actually had to overcome through this process, because now you have one child that's actually doing a virtual academy, but now 3 of them that are in a traditional brick and mortar school are home, but they only have 2 devices. And so they're trying to get through some of those issues. So, you know, dynamics are changing with parents being home. So I thought that was a really eye-opening thing for me to understand, because I just thought, oh, that'd be really easy. So we're going to use this term emergency remote teaching as we talk about this. But before we start, and I'm going to actually ask AJ to share too, because we can't hand over the mic because of the webinar format, but I'm going to ask you to share something that you're grateful for, and I'll explain to you why this is really important to me. When this first started happening, and you know, a lot of our lives obviously were upended because of this, I know I was really down and struggling with all of this, and I shared, I read an article by my friend Patrick Larkin, and it really put things into perspective for me. And what he said was, what are you grateful for that you have now because of this situation? And when I first read that, I actually felt that was kind of almost selfish. It was like a weird thing to think, right? Because I know there's so many people, like obviously this is based on, you know, people getting sick and things like that, and how selfish of a thing that was. But what it actually started centering me on is that I have a lot of things that I am grateful for right now. And it actually put me in a better place to help others. And I think that's what was really helpful for me to think about this. And just one of my stories before I let AJ share his, I actually have not been home for a month straight in 10 years. And it's been really incredible to be home. That's the longest time I've ever had with my daughter. She's 3.5 years old. We're expecting another daughter at the end of May, and we're really excited. And I ask her every single night at dinner, what was the best part of your day? And every single night without fail, she says, Daddy home. And I'll tell you, I think she just says it now. I don't think that's really true. I think she just says it because she loves my reaction to it. And I don't even care if it's true anymore, to be honest. I'm going to be destroyed if she gives me another answer. But I'm grateful for that. And just kind of trying to center on, you know, the opportunities that I have helps me better to help other people. So AJ, what's one thing that, you know, you're grateful for because of this time?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me is I have 4 young kids. One's 11, my daughter, and then I have 2 sons that are in 2nd grade and kindergarten, and then I have a young daughter who's preschool age. And one of the things in kind of like the daily just craziness of having lots of kids is we're constantly on the go. It's not that we don't have fun, and but we're constantly on the go. It's getting ready for school. It's getting to school, getting back, going to activities, eating dinner when we can, getting back. And it's just, we hardly as a family ever get to hang out all together. And I remember just the first week of this all happening, and it took probably 7 to 10 days for our family to get accustomed of just like my 2 boys hanging out and being best friends, and my daughter, you know, doing like school with my youngest daughter. And so the thing that I'm grateful for is being able to not just, you know, hang out as a family, but also to get to know my kids better. And when I've told a couple people that, I think they're like, well, you know, everybody kind of knows. I'm like, no, I actually feel like I know my kids better. I feel like I can parent them better, even though I'm around them all day long. But just that ability to kind of slow down and have conversations, go on walks, things that the daily kind of busyness of life, like kind of wearing busyness as a badge, we never really get to do. And so something I'm definitely grateful for. And I know my wife and I have been doing something every single day, is just jotting down one thing that we want to remember about being together as a family during this quarantine time. So like 20 years down the road, we just have a list of just like things to remember, right? Of what that could be. And just thankful for that.
Yeah, and I love that. And one of the things that I've shared this with AJ, and I'm sure people have heard this if you've heard me speak before, I actually have an email account that I created for my daughter that she's not going to open until she's at least 18 years old. So I've actually been sending her videos and messages about this time, and she's 3.5, so I don't think she's going to remember. So her and I are talking to her in the future. And I think that's really an amazing opportunity to kind of talk about this time, because this is going to be like a history books moment, and to kind of be able to see, you know, how she was will be kind of interesting, as we move forward. I mentioned Patrick Larkin. I saw, I think as Valerie said that Patrick is the associate superintendent in Burlington. Patrick's a very good friend of mine. I actually met him 10, 11 years ago. And I think that's going to land into a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, because the idea is, one thing that I've always focused on is how we use technology to build relationships. And I think that's becoming something that's really, really important, and what happens later. And this is a really interesting passage from the Fellowship of the Ring. And it really talked, it really spoke to me. I wish it need not happen in my time. So do I. And so do all who live and see such times. So that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And that really resonated with me when I saw this, shared for the first time. And really, what opportunities are we going to create because of that? And this is one of the things that we're really going to focus on today. And so the first question I'm going to address is like ideas how to create paradigm shifts in teachers' notions about what truly is important to teach during this time. And I've been reading a lot of articles, and I think they're really important to address this, that the idea that you can just do what you do in a face-to-face setting, that you could just simply move it to an online setting and it'll work effectively. And these two ideas that I'm sharing, they almost seem counterintuitive. And obviously some of the things that we're doing, some of the things that I'm adjusting with, they're not the same as if I was in person. I see a lot of people in the chat have been to your district or you've seen me speak. And so changing some of the things that we're doing is really, really important. But on the other hand, and I think what has really helped me understand what is important and what's valuable actually is exactly the same. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And I'm going to challenge people a little bit right now, because I've always challenged this notion of data driven. And the idea of data driven, it drives me crazy because it tends to focus more on scores than it does kids. And right now, the reason I'm bringing this up, I can see boo data driven. Right now, I'm just going to say something. I don't see data driven being talked about. It's not like, hey, we're going to make data driven decision making. It's all about focusing on kids. And it's not the idea that we don't use data. That's not it at all. But we are learner driven. We're driven by the people we serve has been really important to me. And so this idea of what is valuable and what is, and people talking about the notion of learner driven. I always talk about learner driven, evidence informed. And that's something that we really kind of tap into. And so when I talk about these principles, I think this is a really great time to say what is important right now is going to be also important when we go back. And what does that look like? So at the center of this is relationships. Everything that you do is connected to this. And one of the conversations I was having today was, hey, what if we have kids who miss assignments, right? And or are not checking in. And so the first thing I said is focus on the kid, not the assignment. Because if you focus on the kid, you'll probably get the learning to happen. But if you just focus on the task or the assessment and not the kid, you'll probably lose both in the process. And so those relationships are really important. The idea of how we empower our students, creating those empowering learning experiences. And it's not just about students, having the ability to create things, but create things that are meaningful to them. I've seen people share the idea of like, hey, we want our kids all to read this exact same book during this time. And I'm thinking, you just want kids to read. And so if I give kids an opportunity to read something that is meaningful to them, that is actually really, really crucial. The next one, learner-driven, evidence-informed practice. Who are our kids? How do we serve them? And how do we tap into their strengths? How do we tap into who they are and find their passions right now? And like I said, right now in an emergency remote teaching situation, this is extremely important. But when you go back, these things are all are tapped in or something that's really crucial. And then the last one, educator as master learner. How do we continuously grow as learners? And I'll talk more about this later, but these are things that I want people to really think about as we're going through this process. Is we have to have these considerations of accessibility. Do our kids have the access to the things that they need to get done? And I'm not just talking about resources, but time, and thinking about that. And how do we ensure that they're getting access at the highest levels, that we're ensuring every kid has an opportunity to be successful, that we have flexibility, understanding that some kids right now, they can't go to school during the day because they're taking care of family members, they're connecting in different ways, different responsibilities. So providing some synchronous and asynchronous opportunities, and that's what we've really been trying to focus on in our learning time. And privacy. Do we encourage our kids to share? And that's great, but we also have to understand, privacy considerations and what that looks like. But we talk about privacy, and a lot of times it actually deters people from sharing. And we'll say, well, we don't want to, give up a kid's privacy. But do you give kids opportunity to share to the world if they want to? And I think that's really important in the work that we're doing and what doors open. Many of you know myself and AJ and Katie because of our ability to share our ideas with the world. But a lot of times we actually hold our kids back from that. And so, yes, we got to honor privacy, but if a student actually wants to share their work, how do we actually help them? And I'll tell you, even if you get parent consent, this is really important to me. If you get parent consent for kids, to be sharing their work online, sharing some of the stuff they're doing, you still always ask the kid, because it's always up to them, because, they might have 1 million followers on TikTok and they don't want to post their science lab, online, because it might hurt some of their credibility with their community. So really trying to give kids opportunity, honoring privacy, but giving kids the opportunity to share online. And as we share this, talking about the students' strengths, this to me is really important, is like, what are some of the questions that when we talk about the idea of learner-driven practice, finding out who our kids are and tapping into the passions, tapping into the strengths. And I'll give you examples of something that we do in education that I think, and one of the questions is that was asked earlier is like, how do we differentiate? And I think partly is understanding these answers to these questions about your kids gives you an opportunity to differentiate, to give kids different ways to share their learning, to connect in meaningful ways. And that's what we're tapping into. And probably the biggest one to me is the idea of strengths and tapping into the strengths. And so sharing those ideas of strengths, one thing I always talk about is the idea of response to intervention and multi-tiered support systems. And the idea behind those things is extremely important, but the process sometimes is lacking. And I'll share why I believe that. What we do sometimes, we have students who struggle with things, and then we say, hey, this kid sucks at this, so here's what we're going to do to fix them. And to me, that's not a good process. Now, I know that's not outright what we say, but we kind of say that. And if you focus on this, the first thing we should be talking about with kids, what is this kid really good at? What gets them excited in the morning? And start from that point. And it's not about ignoring things that they can develop and their weaknesses, but it's starting with their strengths. And if you put this in the notion of adults, if I worked for you and you always told me like, hey, we're working on this because you're weak at this, we're going to try to develop this, I'm going to tell you eventually I'm out. I don't want to work with this anymore. But if I actually feel valued, that you're looking at what I do bring to the table, what I do bring to the classroom every single day, then I'm going to be showing up, which right in turn actually connects and develops those strengths, those weaknesses, as well as my strengths. So even when we have classrooms, one of the things that's really important is not only the teacher connecting, but also giving students the opportunity to contribute. One of the things that was shared in the chat is, how do we get our students showing up? Because some of them are not showing up virtually anymore. Do the students in the classrooms feel that their contribution is necessary? Do they feel that to what we're doing online? Or is it just showing up so I'm listening to someone else? I'm just kind of, a passive participant. And so I talk about these 3 areas that are really, really important. And the first one's obvious. You're all here tonight. Thank you so much for being here on your own time. And you're learning for your students. We're trying to give you some ideas to think about this. The next one is learning about your students. Who are your kids? What drives them? What are their passions? What are their strengths? How do we actually tap into that and really knowing who we are? But the last one, I can see a lot of people sharing this, is learning from your students. I've been challenged on this several times because people say, you don't believe the teacher is the expert in the classroom? I'm like, absolutely, they're expert. They're just not the sole source of knowledge. And so we're not just talking about Google and YouTube. I'm talking about every single student, every learner you serve has abilities and knowledge that we don't actually have. And so how do we create spaces where they're sharing, where they're teaching one another? And no offense to any educator in this room right now, the first thing that I'm probably missing right now is probably not my teacher from the school experience. It's my friends. It's the social connection. And maybe like kindergarten, grade 3, that my teacher had been the number one thing. But after that, it would be like what I'm missing with my friends. And so when we actually create spaces where students are learning from one another and we're learning from our students, there's a real power to this. And really that social connection. And Dr. Erin Lawson in St. Louis, the St. Louis area, she actually started this thing that you could easily do in an emergency remote teaching setting. She actually had students doing and leading professional learning. So she'd say, hey, who wants to teach courses on what topic? And so they actually had like a PD day that was led by students, and then students would sign up for other student sessions and teachers would actually participate. Could you do something similar in an emergency remote teaching setting where you're actually creating like a professional learning day where students are offering things? And I think one of the opportunities we have right now is the idea that many states, if not all of them, have basically said, don't worry about standardized testing this year. So this is a time to really push what is possible in school. And next year, if we're back normally, yeah, standardized tests are going to be there, but we're going to be so much better and we can do innovation while teaching the curriculum. It's not an either or scenario, but try to take advantage of those opportunities. And so really, how do we focus on these 3 types of learning as we're growing through this process? And I'm going to turn it over to AJ. Oh, sorry, AJ fell asleep.
I'm gonna turn over to Katie, actually.
No, it's
Sorry.
Katie's turn.
Oh, Katie!
It's like a you know, like when you're a middle child and everyone's like, oh, there's like a sandwich, and then like the most special part is like the peanut butter and jelly in the middle. That's why I'm going between you boys.
Okay, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, bringing the sparkle, baby. So, hi everyone. I'm Kate Novak. I'm a practicing administrator. I'm an assistant superintendent of schools. I also wrote Innovate Inside the Box with George, and I get to work with George and AJ all of the time. And this is such a pleasure to be able to meet with you tonight. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about one of the ways that we can help to meet the needs of all learners in this emergency remote teaching. And George was really talking about all of our whys. Like, why do we have to design learning differently? Why do we have to connect with kids and empower learners and empower ourselves? And I want to share with you a framework that will provide us with some guidance about how to do this. So I'm gonna, in the chat right now, I'm gonna drop all of these slides just so you have access to them. And there are notes on the bottom of the slides if you want to know more about that. And I'm just gonna take you through a couple of quick analogies that will help you to better understand what is this universal design for learning framework and how is it gonna help you to empower learners and to put relationships first. And one of the things that's most important about what George says is this will allow you to also learn from your students. It's not just learning with them, it's learning from them. And so I want to imagine for a moment. Now, this is you really have to imagine this because none of us are allowed to have dinner parties right now, and we shouldn't. But imagine that like when all of this is over, someday we'll be able to have dinner parties again. I'm going to throw a dinner party and I'm going to invite all of you, and it's going to be amazing, right? And every single time we're planning any sort of learning experience, whether it's in person or whether it's remote, we're actually planning a dinner party because we have some goals and we have all these guests, and the needs of those guests is going to be very, very different. There's just so much variability. And I think a lot of times we kind of fall back on the thing that is most comfortable for us. So as I'm chatting about dinner parties, I want you to all tell me, like, what is your signature dish, right? So go right into that chat right now and tell George and AJ, like, if you were just going to slay a dish at a dinner party, what would it be? And I'll tell you right now that I make a really mean chili. I make a really great chili. So if I was going to have a dinner party, I obviously would make my chili. And here's the problem with chili is I love it. I think the recipe is amazing, but there's a real problem with casseroles. There's a real problem with anything that is one size fits all. And the reason that a casserole is a problem is because it doesn't embrace variability. And I know that if you come to my dinner party and I serve chili, there's going to be a lot of you that can't eat it. That's predictable. And so a casserole really has a lot of predictable barriers. So if I serve, a chili and I put like a ton of cheese on top of it, because I mean, that's the best chili. And then there's tortilla chips, and I just spoil it for you. Like you come in and I'm like, thanks for coming to my party. Like we finally can be together again. And here is a big vat of meaty, cheesy chili. And like some of you are like, oh my gosh, like I really can't eat that. I can't access that because you're lactose intolerant, or because you have gluten sensitivity, or you're right on a very specific healthcare regimen. And some of you are going to go, I hate chili. Like I just hate beans, right? The same is true right now, was true before we went into emergency teaching. It's true now. We cannot try to create one thing and share it with students and have it make all of them equally empowered, because there's so many tools right now that are free. And it's like, oh my gosh, I love that this app is free. I'm going to assign all of my students an assignment in it. This article is really cool. I'm going to have them all read the same article. I'm going to make sure that everybody, does this scavenger hunt. We have all of these things, and we do this for professional learning as well. And so we say things like, everyone is to be online at an hour during this time, and we're going to talk about this article. And the reality is when we do things in a one size fits all way, it ends up being very, very limiting to a lot of people. And so if we truly want to meet the needs of a wide variety of kids, we have to recognize the barriers they face and have other options and choices. So right now there's this talk about, like, because we're going remote, we're going virtual. People are calling it virtual learning. This is not virtual learning. And even if it were virtual learning, there's this like almost have and have nots. Like, I'm gonna create all of my learning online, but then when kids don't have access to an internet, or when kids don't have, access to a reliable device, then I'll send home a packet. And what that is that's you making way too many decisions for other people. And I call that kind of like a short order cook syndrome. So we don't want to be making casseroles. We don't want to give every kid the same assignment. We don't want to ask them to do it at the same time. In our book, we talk about that, like, when you get the same thing back from everyone, it's like they're following a recipe. They're not creating anything. And so when we create a casserole, then we start reacting and we become like this short order cook, right? So you have a casserole, I have this chili, and now you're like, oh, I can't eat that. So I'm like, oh, no worries, no worries. I'll make you a salad. I'll make you an egg salad sandwich. Oh, you want chicken wings? I have chicken wings. How about mac and cheese? And what I'm doing is I'm now worrying about making things for individual guests. And some of you are probably doing this right now for students, and you're doing it with colleagues, and you're doing it with staff members. And so what you want to make sure is, as we're moving to teaching in a more remote space, emergency remote teaching, you're providing options and choices. You're designing things so that every single learner has options and choices to be able to meet their needs. And it's because you recognize the barriers that they face. And so one of the things that we talk about in Universal Design for Learning all the time is what is necessary for some is good for all. So I know that some of you, I can predict that some of you are going to have lactose intolerant. And so one of the things that I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have something on the buffet that doesn't have lactose. But that's not only reserved for those of you who are lactose intolerant, because what is necessary for some is a really good option for everyone. So when you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to provide this amazing learning experience for my kids who have internet, and then I'm going to provide this other experience for those that don't, why don't we shift to say, hi, everyone, here's the goal, and here's your options. If you have access to online, if you can do it this way, you can also do it in a hard copy, because we don't need to be looking at screens all day in order to learn. And so I just want to make a distinction between this concept of being really traditional, being really static, creating a curriculum and being like, this is what we're all going to do. We're all going to follow the recipe. You're going to read this. You're going to post in this discussion board. You're going to watch this video. It's very one size fits all. And when you do that, you're going to exclude some people because they can't access it. And you're going to exclude others because they just think it's so incredibly lame. It doesn't connect to their hearts. It's not authentic. If you do that, you're going to end up doing a lot of differentiated instruction, which requires you to be responsive. As what George was saying, in like an RTI model, you go, uh-oh, this isn't working. I better do something differently for those kids. But what we want is we want kids to be innovators. We want them to be learners. We want them to be leaders of their own education. So instead, we're going to proactively think about what are the barriers that prevent our kids from learning. We're going to design options and choices so all of them can actually take pathways that allow them to reflect and to observe and to create. And we value the variety of our students. And so one of the things we say is firm goals, flexible means. And when our tier 1 environment, when the best first instruction is universally designed, you're going to have to differentiate instruction much, much less. Because if I invite you to my house and I have a pasta buffet and I say, there's gluten-free pasta, there's regular pasta, I have all these different sauces, I have salad, I have proteins, there's going to be so many of you who can find something delicious. You can create your own meals. And so I'm not going to have to react and make very many things for you specifically. If I'm serving a chili, there's going to be way too many people and I'm going to become a short order cook. So when we talk about how do you innovate inside the box, we talk about the importance of doing that with Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework that you proactively identify barriers and you create options and choices that puts kids in the driver's seat. And you say to kids, here's the goal. I want you all to learn about, whatever, photosynthesis. Now, remember, you're going to have to be able to explain the process. You're going to have to be able to identify the different steps. But how do you want to learn it? Do you want to go out and do some labs? Do you want to watch videos? Do you want to read content? You want to be in a Zoom with me and I'll give you some instruction. Okay. We want to provide as many options and choices as we can. And then we say to students, when you're done, create something amazing to show me that you understand the process. Do you want it to be a YouTube video? Make something on TikTok, go viral. If you want to do a series of social media posts or write a traditional poem or, create a worksheet or take a quiz or make a quiz, right? And when we do that, we say, I honor your choices. I honor your identity. Just go for it and do it. And then we take the time to help them reflect. And we say, the choices that you made, did it allow you to meet the goal? And what else would you have needed from me? Or what other options would have helped you to get there? And that's how we learn from students, and it pushes our design forward. And the same process should be true in professional learning. One size fits all professional development where you are required to go and sit and get and gag on some casserole is not going to make any of us better. You're here tonight because you chose to be here tonight, and you're empowered to improve your practice. And students will always follow the same when we think about firm goals, flexible means, and we put them in charge. So my last slide here is passing the baton to my bestie, AJ. And so AJ, you're going to take it away. We've talked about the why, we've talked about the how, and now you're the magic.
AJ, just before you start, first of all, I told everyone, Katie, you'd do an amazing job talking about the importance of differentiation. And so thank you for sharing that. Before AJ takes over, what I'm going to encourage you to do, just share right now, so far, we're about 30 minutes in, what has been one big takeaway you've had so far, just so we can see that, and I'll turn it over to AJ.
All right. So I love, obviously I always love the analogy there, Katie, but I think what's so powerful is thinking about how that connects to the why, right? How it really connects to why we're doing what we're doing, whether it's in person or in a kind of emergency remote teaching and learning environment like we're all in right now. And so I wanted to kind of say, here's the what and the how of how you can provide those choices, of how you can engage and empower learners in this environment where it's not just going to be regurgitation, where it's not just going to be the worst parts of teaching, where we can get the best parts of learning involved and really kind of walk through some steps of how we engage and empower. And so the first thing that I think we got to talk about is it still starts with choice. Exactly what Katie kind of laid out of kind of the how. If choice isn't there for our kids, if it's not there for our staff when we do professional learning, then what we're really going to be missing out on is that ownership piece. It's really impossible for any human to feel a sense of ownership and empowerment of what they're learning and what they're doing, what they're making, what they're creating, unless they have some type of choice in the process. But a lot of times when we're doing this, we feel like we're hanging on by a thread, right? How do we provide choice? How do we give that buffet of options without kind of pulling all our hair out? And I did pull all my hair out. So I'm starting from a place of not having to worry about that. But I think I'm going to give you just a couple steps here. It's going to be talking about the scaffolds that you can use, talk about the different process of what you can use to engage and empower right now in our current situation of what that looks like. So the first step is giving students a reason for learning in this virtual environment. understanding that we are all at probably the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy right now, right? We're somewhere between physiological and safety, and it's really hard when we get a sense of belonging, when we can talk to people, when we have that sense of communication. It really kind of revs up our spirits. I don't know about you, but even kind of having like a Zoom chat with friends, and we've been doing like trivia sessions with my friends and stuff like that, that sense of belonging like makes me feel so much better. And so step one is giving students a reason, starting with a problem or a challenge or an inquiry before we even think about standards. Really kind of goes back to that core of innovative teaching and learning that George was talking about in his session. And the one caveat I have here is that you know best for your situation. You know best what's going to work in your class with your kids, of what you're going to be able to do. And there's many ways to accommodate, modify, and adjust. But if we want to start with a reason for learning virtually, here's some different reasons we can start with. Here's where the buffet comes in. Some kids are going to get excited by creating a physical product. I know my daughter, who's in 5th grade, like I said earlier, I have 4 kids. My oldest, who's in 5th grade, she had the chance to create a recycle, like an upcycle project for her class, where she was going to take something from the house and make it something that she could use in her everyday life. She took a shoebox, she took string, all kinds of stuff, and created something that she could share with her classmates. It could also be a digital product. One of the other projects that she did that she loved was having the ability to pop onto Canva and create a kind of schedule for working out or physical activity. And she did that for her PE class. You also can have a potential reason being a natural phenomenon, looking at the world around us, being kind of intrigued by how things work and interact. Potential reason could be an awareness of an issue. Obviously, we have the issue of a pandemic right now, but there's so many other things impacting communities and students' lives. Having them start from that place of meaning and relevance of a real reason is that connection there for some attention. A problem to solve. Lots of different ways you can solve a problem, but when you present that problem, now it's a reason for learning. They're actually going to get engaged into it. And then, of course, we can start with empathy, putting ourselves in the shoes of someone else, thinking about a potential kind of like, oh, what would it look like? I think one of the most impactful things I saw was students doing an art project and creating letters and all kinds of artwork to send to nursing homes because they know they can't have visitors. And what does that look like to create digital things for them as well? And then finally, a potential reason could be geeky interests. And the reason I'm saying to start with a challenge or a reason or those different types of things is because when we have the situation that we have right now, when kids are going to get excited, when they have a choice of actually creating and making something, that's allowing them in the time that they have, asynchronous, synchronous, whatever the situation is in your school with how it's learning, to actually dive deeper into something. We were talking earlier about, what it's like. Somebody in the chat was saying, it's so cool when I'm in a PD and someone shares a great TED Talk and I'm watching a TED Talk and then maybe I can go down like this rabbit hole watching all these TED Talks. And that's exactly what this is. If we give geeky interests, things that they're excited about, genius hour type of stuff, then they can really dive in and be excited about the learning process. Step 2 is now focusing on what students are going to learn. So now we're connecting the reason, right? The challenge, the inquiry, the problem, what they're going to do with what they're actually going to learn, what knowledge and skills. So even with something like a genius hour, I think genius hour, 20% time, passion projects, inquiry projects, whatever you want to call it, is one of the best things we could do right now for students, because we're basically giving them time, which they have at home, to create their own learning path, something they're interested about, and document their learning journey, and eventually create a product that they're going to pitch to the rest of the class. When they do this Genius Hour project, though, they're doing tons of learning. This is where the digital resources come in. This is where them talking to adults comes in, talking to different folks, not just doing Googling things, but actually reaching out and having phone calls and all kinds of interactions with people to kind of get information. And then they can start sharing. This is where they're writing updates on Seesaw, or doing video updates on Flipgrid, or they're having audio, creating their own podcast to share and commenting with peers. That gives that social and human lens of the work that we're doing. But still, they're all coming with that buffet of them choosing different things. Then they start building their Genius Hour project, and eventually they're sharing out. And you can do this in lots of different ways remotely. How fun would that be for students to hop on a Zoom together and be sharing out what they're learning? instead of just hearing about what they should be learning, right? Now they're sharing out and being that expert, as George was saying. It could be in PD or it could just be what they're learning about. But here's the thing. When they're doing this project, they're also hitting all kinds of standards. They're hitting research standards. They're hitting inquiry and text evidence standards. They're hitting writing, presenting, creating standards. They're even hitting constructing, critiquing, modeling standards. When you make this shift, especially in this environment, we can't do traditional instruction in an emergency remote environment. It's almost impossible to do that. There's tons of equity issues when we do that. And so if we make students not be the receiver, right? If you kind of look at that traditional student role, the receiver, but in this project-based learning, be the discoverer, and they have the time and the ability to discover, then the engagement, then the empowerment happens. So what will students make, create, or design? This is the third step. And who are they creating for? And I wanted to share just a bunch of examples. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a link in the chat once I'm done to all my free virtual resources that I've kind of curated. And you're going to have free access to every single one of these activities and projects that I'm sharing here. And it's fantastic to be able to give your kids that buffet experience. You're going to have 1,000+ resources of projects that you can do with kids. So what does this look like in elementary, right? You know, I have 3 elementary age kids. I taught middle school and high school, and I've been an administrator, a director of learning innovation, K through 12. I've been an instructional coach, K through 12. And so I've worked with all different grade levels. Well, at the young grades, right, you know, kindergarten through 2nd grade, these types of activities that students are doing, it allows them to kind of really put themselves in the place of others. So one that I just wanted to highlight here, and you have access to all of these, is the box project. Every single kid probably at their house, wherever they live, has access to a cardboard box. And so now having them create something in the cardboard box, using their creativity, collaboration, going through the critique process online in asynchronous ways, having them share pictures of what they're making and getting feedback, and the teacher kind of looking at any single one of these K-1-2 students can be able to do this. It takes a little bit of time to go through the project, but now it is their creation. They are going through the learning process. They're communicating their ideas with the group and their audience. There's all kinds of examples in here, but this is just one way you could do it K2. Grades 3 through 5. These are some different types of things that you can do. I love the selfie rights project with kids. Basically create a project saying, do animals have rights when humans take selfies with them? So it's a fantastic one. But the Dream Vacation Project is one that I'm seeing teachers all over the place in my school district use, because everybody right now is dreaming about a vacation because we're all quarantined and sheltered at home. And so having grades 3, 4, 5, 6 do a cross-curricular project, which they're using a budget, they're hitting core areas of reading, writing, speaking to create a dream vacation, allocate resources, calculate the cost, convert currencies, all these different types of things work really well. When you move up to middle school and high school, now we're personalizing how the learning works, right? We're kind of giving those options. So think about English or English language arts. These are the different types of things you can do, giving that buffet of choices. Genius Hour projects, book pitches. Right now, instead of having every kid read the same book, giving them independent novel choices, and then having them pitch those books to their classmates as converting them into a movie, right? It could look like something like creating a press release for a book that they're reading together as a class or in literature circles, or those different types of things. It also could look like a project like this, looking at how different videos go viral and making the argument of why certain videos go viral and other videos don't go viral. When you look at social studies, there's lots of different projects that we're doing in our school district. Whiteboard videos are happening, all kinds. Historical documentary projects are happening. Here's just some examples. Again, you're going to have access to all these projects in the link that I'm going to share here that you're going to get access to. But these are just some different things that students are doing. What a perfect time to do a project about drones and talking about whether or not they're fun or dangerous, because now drone deliveries are starting to happen. Resilience Cafe, these different types of things. When we're talking about math, creating a board game at home, creating a scratch game, tutorial videos, just some different ones that I'm seeing kids really liking. This 5th grade project of Spotifying a song, using fractions and divisions to talk about what that looks like. The Game of Life financial literacy project for some older students. Again, what does this look like of putting math in action? Having that relevancy and meaning be very important, right? taking what's happening with stimulus and all different types of things and putting that into a project where they can use real world math. In science, some of my favorite ones have been the Mythbuster projects that I've seen, and some of these different ones here where they're talking about different viruses, or the Cell and Element one, or the Take Action project, which a lot of kids really love. And this can happen in every different subject area, right? It can happen in health and physical education classes of creating your own fitness campaign and giving them choice there. It could happen in art and music and economics, any of those different types of classes. And so when you think about all these options now all of a sudden it becomes a very creative and engaging and empowering experience. And so step 4 is, how can you scaffold this? And the main thing in emergency remote teaching is that we are guides, right? We're not going to be able to teach in a traditional sense. We're going to have to be this guide on the side. And I really like actually kind of using this as the guide on the ride along for the journey. When you think about the most famous guides from history, or the most famous guides that we know, just like George was mentioning, kind of Gandalf, you're giving your character, which is our students or our staff, if we're a leader, we're giving them a plan and calling them to action. They're not always going to follow the plan. They're not always going to take the right actions. That's our job, to be there alongside of them, helping them along the way, and having it be okay if they're failing, if they're not getting it the first time. Here's some different ways we can scaffold student ownership, some different ways that I've seen teachers do it that are really kind of liking it. So just take your online kind of Zoom chats with students, those different types of things. How about doing a Zoom discussion game with students, right? Having students, we know when there's like 30 people in a Zoom, it's really hard to have a conversation, even if there's 10 people in a Zoom. So now you can have them have cards, or they could just have like pink written down on a piece of paper and green written down on a piece of paper. And now they're playing the cards and the teacher's facilitating the discussion. You're talking about the book or a problem or, any type of thing that you're studying and looking at. You're having a discussion about that, but they're playing the cards and you're kind of giving points and delineating and kind of, really facilitating the discussion. You can also move into a virtual fishbowl. Here's where you have different sets of groups talk for like 3 or 4 minutes at a time. We're going to have these 4 students talk, kind of like George, Katie, and myself just did right here. These 4 students are going to talk. The rest of the class is really going to be ready to ask questions for them. Then we move on to a new set of 4 students. And let's talk about conferences as well. Conferencing is maybe the most important thing we can be doing with our students right now. And there's 3 different types of conferences that John Spencer and I talk about in our book, Empower. And the first is a feedback conference. Here is where the focus is targeted help, and the teacher's answering questions and the kids are asking questions. When you hand out an assignment like this, a project, what are some of those things that they can talk about? A reflection happens midway through or towards the end of a project experience, where they are now answering questions and we're asking questions. And eventually we want to get to that mastery place where we're asking and answering both. Finally, how will students reflect and be assessed? And so I've seen a lot of different ways that this is happening, but 2 of my favorite are peer feedback and the grit rubric. Peer feedback, if you make it very explicit of what this feedback looks like, this is what kids are missing, right? They're missing that connection. And so having them be able to have 10-minute, either synchronous or asynchronous kind of chats with their peers about what they're working on. Now there's a reason for them discussing something in school, because they're working on a project experience. They're working on something that's a challenge, that is inquiry, something that has meaning to them, and they can have very specific roles of what that looks like. And ultimately, as teachers, one of the things that we want to do is be able to assess students right now, not just on what they create, not just on the final project or final product, and not just on kind of like a typical summative assessment. We really want students to self-assess themselves on the process of learning. And so you're going to have access to the K through 12 version of this grit rubric, which the G stands for guts, the R for resiliency, the I for integrity, and the T for tenacity. And basically it's a process-oriented rubric, a rubric in which folks can kind of actually give themselves a grade of what it looks like for them walking through this process. Did they have resiliency going through the project? What was really tough about the day or the week as they were kind of trying to do the learning? It gives teachers insight as students kind of self-assess and self-reflect, but also provides fuel for the conversations that we're going to have during our conferences with students as they talk about the learning process. So when we take those 5 steps, we can engage and empower. It doesn't matter if it's in person or if it's in a kind of emergency remote teaching environment like we're at right now. We can really give kids a choice in the learning. We can have them own their learning process, and we can really have that buffet of options for them to be engaged and empowered. I think right now we're going to turn that back over to George so we can talk a little bit, take some Q&As here before we share a couple extra things at the end. And I'm going to put the link in the chat right now of kind of all the resources that we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's been great to see. I'm watching the chat, and people are actually connecting their Twitter accounts so that we stay connected after this. So please feel free to share your Twitter handle, and hopefully we can all connect with one another. That'd be awesome to see after this time, because I think the power of what we're doing right now is the ability to actually connect with one another before, after, and during this time. Just as an aside before we finish up, Empower, Innovate Inside the Box, and Innovators Mindset are $2.99 on Kindle right now. So it's I know it's just for a few days. So if any of you are interested, I know Katie's going to throw the links in here. But I'm just going to finish up and share some final thoughts because we have only a few minutes left, and then AJ is going to close up. And so one of the questions I think is really valuable that we're asking is that what's going to come out of this situation? How is this going to make us better leaders? How is this going to make us better people? And one of the things that I have been talking about for years, and I think is more important than ever, is how are we moving from the school column to this learning column? And I'm not an absolutist. I don't think that we don't have compliance in our world and it's all about empowering kids. Sometimes compliance is a reality. But when you look at that learning, how are we actually starting with questions, developing kids as problem finders, right? How are we actually creating that social environment in emergency remote teaching? How are we personalizing the learning that we're doing? So when you look at these slides, how do you actually connect this? And the question, or the answer to every question in education always starts with relationships. And if you see here, this is a research article that was talking about why relationships are so important, and that, something as simple as greeting kids in the hallway before they walk in the classroom actually improves academics. Now, I want to make sure that I identify that it improves academics, but learning is also in that portion. It's not just about getting grades, but think about this time when we actually started this chat today. We were, talking to people, greeting them. I saw someone was from the Kitchener-Waterloo area. That's where my sister lives. And getting to know each other through this time actually makes us more valuable. And Bill Faraday, he actually wrote this blog post about connecting, what are some tips? And I shared the article and the links about some tips to actually connect with kids but when they're doing this virtual remote setting. And he shared a very simple idea, and it's the equivalent of actually greeting kids in the hallway before they come in, is that every single kid that comes into their webinar or their chat rooms, he is acknowledging them and saying something really personal to kind of connect with them before they actually get into learning. And as I was working with California Virtual Academies, one of the participants said that I appreciate you don't get right into the content. You actually build connections first, because when we start talking about the content immediately, it becomes almost clinical and cold. And really, like I said, the answer always starts with relationships and why that's important. And so we have to have a renewed focus on that when we go back to school. But as we think about how this will become better, we are being thrust upon this change. But that doesn't mean that you don't have control over what you become out of this process. And so how do we actually initiate change in a meaningful way that when we go back to school, we are so much better than what we were before? And I saw this tweet. I thought this was amazingly powerful. Daniel Hodge, and I hope I'm saying the name right, he shared this. He said, today my students listed about 20 things they actually like about remote learning. And we quickly turned that into a list of changes I need to make into my classroom next year. That when we look at this stuff, how do we become better because of this? And I know that a lot of the ideas that Katie and AJ and I myself have shared, these are things that we believe face-to-face versus emergency remote teaching, but we're saying we need to really double down on what's important and what's valuable. And I think part of what I'm seeing is teachers have this renewed sense of purpose in their learning because they remember why I became a teacher. It was to build those connections with their kids, and they're doing this way. And we need to keep that purpose going in the work that we're doing. And I think it's partly because we're seeing people step up, but people are really valuing the importance of education. And a lot of people that are having to work with their kids at home with school, they're struggling. They're seeing the value of teachers. And so when we look at the situation, this is a quote from Innovate Inside the Box that I shared. I think it's really meaningful to this time, is about how do we actually bounce forward. And I love Donna Volpita shares, resilience doesn't just mean getting back to normal after facing a difficult situation. It means learning from the process in order to become stronger and better at tackling the next challenge. And like I said, how do we get better because of this? And a lot of the conversations here are about the importance that every kid has the opportunity to be successful in a way that is meaningful to them. And when this first started teaching or happening, I saw a lot of these conversations. Well, we have a bunch of kids who have access to all this technology, but we have a bunch of kids who don't. So it's not really fair. So nobody should be doing this stuff at all. And then I connect with people like Deidre Raymer from West Dallas, Milwaukee. She has 8,000 students in her district. And within the first 3 days, they got hold of every single kid minus 18 kids out of 8,000. And within 2 days after that, they made sure they connect with every kid. They found out who has access to technology, who needs Wi-Fi hotspots. So what they said is, look, we have kids who have access to this stuff. We have kids who don't. We got to figure out how to get this. And they're focusing on creating equitable opportunities at the highest level. And I think that's really important, is this is something we need to do virtually, online, face-to-face. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And so a lot of the conversation has been about this. When we go back, we're going to have a new normal. And I'm not down with that. I know things are going to be different, but I'm focused on how do we actually create a new and better normal? How do we actually utilize this situation, all the learning that's happening, so that when we come back to school, we are actually way better than when we left? That, you know, we know that we're going to have more of appreciation of those face-to-face connections because we're craving them right now, more appreciation. But all this learning that's happening, all these things that are thrust, the thing that's keeping me going is this is going to make me better. So I'll let AJ finish up, but we need to focus as we continue to grow through this process about that new and better normal and why that's so important for not only our students, but for ourselves. And so AJ, you can close up, but thanks for taking the time to be here tonight with all of us.
Yeah, I would say thanks so much. And every time George mentions that term, new and better normal, I just want to start a slow clap. All right. I mean, it makes me feel so positive about this situation, knowing how much, just awfulness is happening right now. Just understanding the idea of that new and better normal is something to me that is just powerful. And so I just wanted to share, as we're finishing up right here, just how much I love working with both George and Katie. We run an academy together. We're the Learning and Leading team at learningandleading.com.
And I'm in the middle again.
We're the team. And I really love working with these two. Obviously, they're just intelligence and also passion and authentic kind of wear off on you after a while. But I love just what the chat happened tonight, the conversations with people, and just, the fact that one of the things that we really wanted to do in today's session is exactly what happened, where so much learning was happening in the chat right there, that people want to copy and paste the chat. I don't know if George and Katie, if you saw that, but we're copying and pasting the chat and putting that together, because that's what happens when groups of educators get together and want to share and want to help each other and want to help kind of lift each other up. And so that's what we're doing at Learning and Leading. And I just want to say thank you for everybody taking whatever your time zone is right now, taking an hour, hanging out, and just spending it with us. All the resources are there. We'll obviously share them out again. But just wanted to say that we appreciate you, and we want to make sure that we end on time like a good teacher here. So we're going to say bye and just thank you again all so much for coming out and taking part and really adding to the experience. That chat was awesome. So thank you all so much.
Someone was asking what our team name is. I feel like we need a team name.
That's it, right?
We're taking suggestions.
The LLA. It's the LLA.
La 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 la. Oh, team virtual dinner parties. You are all too much fun.
I know. We're gonna have to do that. All right,
Okay,
thank you all
thanks.
so much.
Thanks, George. Thanks, AJ.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We will post the full chat log with the recording. It should go up tomorrow on learningrevolution.com. We've got one more session for those who are night owls. Come up in about half an hour. Thanks to the three of you. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Bye now.
Thanks so much.